Okay, so I'm one of the technical writers at Puppet Labs. I was the only one for a little while. And when I first got here, we had this thing called the language tutorial. It wasn't a tutorial. It was it was a bit of a mess, actually. You can see that there are additional language features in it. It was kind of the whole thing all on one page, trying to talk about the Puppet language and not really organized in the best way. And a lot of it was kind of out of date. And that was because the Puppet language accreted over a pretty long period of time and changed stewardship a couple of times as engineers came and went. And so did the docs. And the result of that was that the language tutorial was, it might have actually been a tutorial at one point, it's hard to tell. But it wasn't super useful. It got the job done, but it was hard to find what you were looking for. So I had a good/bad idea, which was to rewrite the whole thing as a multi-page thing with a kind of visual index with, you can see it on the website. Basically, it's the rewritten language reference. It works okay. But in order to do that, I had to go through the language tutorial and see what I could find in terms of, is the information even still accurate? And I would start investigating one thing and kind of end up down this rabbit hole and keep investigating more things, and it got a little out of hand. So here's what I found. We're just going to take you on a safari of interesting things that I learned about Puppet. So what do you think that's going to output? True. Let's talk about collectors. So you know the collectors, the angle bracket with the pipes. There was a lot of confusion about what these things were called. Down in the code, they're called collections, but then out elsewhere in the docs, people were using collections to refer to classes and define types. So that was a note. I ended up calling them collectors, but spaceship was what the official name in the language tutorial was. And they're used for collecting virtual resources, among other things. So given these resources here, you've got one with a tag called 1, one with a tag called 1, 2, well, 2 tags. One with 3 tags, 1, 2, and 3. And if you collect based on a tag that all of them have, they'll all get realized. That's pretty standard. But you'll see that we're doing tag equals 1. What happens if you, yeah, so that's a non-transitive equality operator. We'll also see that if you try to test equality against an array, you'll see that well, I'm not quite sure what it's doing there. You'll see that all 3 notifies fired, even though only one of them has that exact value, and one of them doesn't even have one of those values in the array. So it's a little unclear what's going on there. How about if we say not equal? 2 of them fire, but the first one doesn't. Yeah, so what? In conclusion, equality is not equal to equality, it seems. So, yeah. Let's move on to classes. How about a class? And if you say include class, what's that? Yeah, well, you would expect that to fail, right? How about if you say include class with quote marks? Yeah, it was a raging success.
Is that all because of the bear word network?
It is, yeah. Class is a reserved word, but
Only the bear word.
Right, there's reserved and then there's reserved, and like, you know. Yeah. Okay, what is search? Who here knows what search is? There's a function called search in Puppet core. Yeah. Yeah. So here we have a class called parent, and we're going to say search parent, and then outside that class we're going to try to declare a defined type that is defined inside that class, which for reasons, because Puppet existed before modules existed, that's the name of that class is actually parent : does something. But we're just going to try and say does something. We're also going to say include woe. That class's name isn't woe, it's parent : woe. And then we're going to try and notice with a variable that's in there too. And we see that well, I can give you the output of this sometime later. It just dumps a random namespace into the local namespace. So what happens is that notice doesn't give you anything because it doesn't attach the scope, but it does attach the namespace. So all of those class declarations and defined type declarations totally work outside of the class. Yeah, this is still in Puppet 3.2, by the way. Have you seen this syntax? Yeah, that's an array of resource references. Yeah, you can feed that to a meta parameter and make a bunch of relationships, and it works. Have you seen this one? How about this one? Yeah, it's actually the same as the last one. I don't really know what's going on there. It must flatten it or something. They all kind of look similar, so you would kind of try to use them in similar places. But we can see here that they mostly work until you try to put an array of resource references on one side of a chaining arrow, and that blows up. How about this? If you give a resource an attribute override block, like you would in an inherited class, that works with a multi-reference like that, but you can't give an array of resource references. So they're completely different syntaxes. And I named the non-array one multi-references because it seemed to be a thing that didn't actually have a name yet. So that was exciting. Yeah, here's another one. What does this do? Yeah, so we said include bar, but it didn't actually include bar. That's because include bar actually never means include bar. It means try to include a bunch of completely unrelated horseshit, and then include bar as a last resort if none of that works. So you'll see that when we were inside class foo, saying include bar tried to include foo : bar. Yeah, that's bug 2053. Yeah. How about case sensitivity? As you can see, the equality operator is actually not case sensitive, but the in operator is. So anyway. Yeah. Falseness is truth. You guys have probably, this was actually one of the first things I ran into when I was collecting WAT, was that the facts are all strings. So if you, yeah, and the string false is actually true. Yeah.
We learned not to have false and true be fact because they end up as strings instead of.
Yeah. There's actually there's a string to bool function in standard lib that you can use to protect yourself that way. And as soon as I started doing that, it kind of escalated. And I started questioning the very meaning of truth. Let me see if I can try to remember where some of these actually went. I feel like resource references are always true, even if the type doesn't exist and the instance doesn't exist. Negative numbers are true. 0 is true. String to bool 0 is true. That was kind of exciting. What else? Or no, I think that was only for a, no, that's right. I was putting these for what would be true if it didn't fail. Anyway. Yeah, that was fun. That's in a GitHub repo. You can run it all yourself. Yeah. Let's express ourselves with some expressions. You've seen this before. Have you seen this before? Yeah, you can just throw random expressions into a variable interpolation token in a string with double quotes. And I was so sure that was going to fail. I was positive. So then I went exploring a little more. You can put regular expression tests in there. I thought that one was worthy of some Comic Sans. Keanu Sans. What else do we have here? You can use an in statement in there, of course. If you can do a regular expression test, why not? So that's pretty cool. This one actually blows up. You can do expressions with variables and literals in there, but you can't do function calls. Yeah. Scope lookup? Well, if you reference a variable inside one of those expressions, it'll come from wherever that variable is supposed to come from. So that could come from top scope. It could come from local scope. Are you talking about like the scope.lookup that you'll see in a template? You would have to. No. Yeah. Because that function only works inside of a template, and we're not in a template right now. Yeah.
That's a function underneath a class. Well, there's no
Yeah.
classes above it, so
Yeah.
it's
Yes. How about if you do dollar and then dollar inside that? That actually works. How about if you leave off the sigil, but you put a bunch of spaces in front? That works. You can just put a literal string in there too. Sorry about my last decade strings. How about this? Left operand of multiplication is not a number. Well, no. If you collapse the space, it will still do that. We're just working on some very unfamiliar definitions of number.
The bear word is not a number, it's a string.
Yeah, there we go. So actually, if you quote the numbers so they're now strings, that's how I learned about data types in Puppet. Numbers are actually always strings, but if you let's back up a second. What's really going on here, or no, that's right. Here we go. Let's skip to the GIF. Okay, so the first bear word in an interpolation block gets silently turned into a variable. So 20 became $20, and $20 is reserved for regex capture variables if you, for some reason, write a regular expression with more than 20 terms in parentheses. Except we weren't inside a conditional, so it was undef. So you're trying to do undef times and then a bear word 20, but the second bear word is still 20 or 80, whatever that was. So that was so that was raring to go, and we went. We'll go through a couple of these. I feel like yeah we already saw most of these. You can see that I went and tried to make a regular expression with 26 terms, and that worked great. Yeah. We can talk about aliases a bit. Who knows about aliases? Who knows that there's always an alias? Yeah. All right, who knows what a name var is? Yeah. Okay, so resources have all of these names, and they've got one name called a title. They've got another name called a name, unless it's not called name, unless it's called something like path. And then they can have other names called alias that you can use with the alias metaparameter. And these things all kind of, it's a little unclear what they're all for. The title and the name var are separate so that you can have an identity on the target system, but then also have a stable identity within the compiler, so that if you're trying to refer to a resource that might have a different path on disk on different types of operating system, then you can just refer to it in a stable way. That makes total sense. But you can sort of, here, we'll see that if you make a relationship to to an alias of another resource, it actually works fine. And you can sort of see that when you try to make a relationship to the name var instead of the title. That'll still often work as long as you're using the before and require metaparameters. If you try to use the chaining arrows instead, you actually can't. You have to use the title only. Yeah, okay. How about realize? when you're using the realize function to make a virtual resource happen. No, that has to be the title. Can't even use the name bar. It just has to be the title. But if you use a collector, that totally works. Yeah. All right. So what did I learn?
How many of these things have you just documented or?
And how many have I kept under wraps?
Well, no. Great question, but how many have they decided were actually bugs and should be fixed?
A fair amount. I did discover a lot of bugs this way. And a lot of these are behaviors that we don't necessarily want.
And some are easier to fix than others.
That's true. And some of them it's not clear whether we should fix, and you would have to do it on a major version boundary anyway, because I'll guarantee you someone is using half of what you saw so far. Yeah, it's always a tricky question. I know that Henrik right now has done a lot of work with the future parser, and the core team is starting to do some preliminary work to build a Puppet spec. This is maybe time to start talking about what I actually managed to make out of all this. What I put together, the language reference, the kind of reformed language reference, it's not a spec, and it's not really a guide, and it's not really a complete layout of all of the observed behavior, because I didn't want to overwhelm people, and I didn't want to guide people into doing things that were going to go away. So it's kind of this neither fish nor fowl of a document where we're trying to talk about what kind of like the way you would write Puppet code if it were a better world, right? Trying to lead people into paths that are going to be supportable and stable over the long term, and document as much of the weirdness as we have to tell people to watch out for it. And what we found is that it's not really a good foundation for a spec. It's a good start, but it's not. All of these things will come up. Someone will find something new that we didn't cover in that reference and that I had never seen before. Like, what was that one that Henrik came up with where I laughed really, really hard? I can't remember it. And the question comes up, like, is this a feature of the language, or is this a bug? And you can't tell by looking at the language reference because it's trying to help as best you can with, today and maybe a couple of years in the future. So that was an interesting experience to learn what the kind of boundary is between documentation and a spec. And at the start, I thought I was going to come out with something that could be used as a spec. That's not the case. So, I mean, what did I learn from doing all of this spelunking? In the larger sense, I mean, I learned a lot of stuff. I learned that if you're dealing with a system that's in an unknown state, because it's accreted over the years and things have just fallen out of date information-wise, do science to it. There's no substitute for getting elbows deep in it and actually finding out what different things do. And long-lived systems do get weird. The other thing I learned is you've got to talk to the old-timers who've been, I'm using old-timers loosely because Puppet goes back to, 2006. Talk to people who have been using the system on a day-to-day basis, because even the weirdest system often works pretty well for people who know their way around it. The trick is that you can't really go up to someone and ask, hey, tell me everything you know about Puppet's edge cases, because they'll freeze up. I'll freeze up. I freeze up when this talk took me so long to find all that. Anyway, they'll freeze up, and it's because you can't, when you get into that mindset of communicating in an attempt to communicate a complete state of a system, you just can't do it. So you've got to take your time. You've got to get stuff from people over a long period. And I think the weirdest thing I found was that WAT brings us together. Here is my general theory of social capital of WAT in engineering cultures. If you are trying to discover things about a system in an unknown state, and you're working with a lot of people who can't give you a complete info dump of that state just because they're not capable of it. No one's capable of that. Sharing the WAT that you find is a good way to provoke other input of WAT from people who will just remember something they saw like last year. And you get them in the mindset of let's talk about all this weird stuff we're looking at, and it'll just start coming out. So these conversations in the hallway that I had over the course of this long period in 2012 when I was doing this were really illuminating. I would bring up something like, I think that the truth of falsity was the first one that came to me from someone else. I was like, whoa, really? And I talked to someone else about that, and they were like, oh yeah, have you seen this other thing that does something completely weird? And then I think the variable interpolation thing with throwing random expressions in there came from somewhere else. They were actually like, I don't know if this can do this. Can this do this? And I was like, let's find out. And it's this kind of virtuous cycle of talking about investigation that I find rolls on really, really well if you get a lot of people contributing just a little bit of WAT. And venting about it can keep your morale up because that's actually pretty funny. And because if you're trying to investigate a system in an unknown state, it can maybe take a while, and you're going to be at it for a bit. So take your joy where you can, and just enjoy yourself as much as you can. Yeah. That's pretty much what I've got. I'd love to stick around here for a minute and talk some more about just the process of investigating the language and questions of where the language might go. Thank you very much. So yeah, does anyone have something they want to talk about?
I'm curious how much of what you found you think would have been mitigated if Puppet had used a actual pre-existing language instead of inventing a DSL.
Well, given that a lot of what you saw is inappropriately exposed Ruby behavior, I'm going to say a fair amount of that would still be there.
Do you think that any of this had a factor to play in the Ruby DSL being taken out, like the nasty underpinning being too easy to get at, getting to the behavior?
No, it was more that let me remind myself of the state of that Ruby DSL. The Ruby DSL just did odd things because you were loading it as Ruby code. When you're loading Puppet code off the disk, there's a sort of predictable path that it goes through in the system. There's a system in place for reloading Puppet code. There's a system in place for loading Puppet code differently from modules if the environment is different. And what we found with the Ruby DSL was because you are handing it off to the Ruby loader and letting the Ruby loader just do its thing with it, you get things like it'll just stick around when it comes from one environment and it'll never be replaced by something from another environment. The environment separation was a really big problem. You'll get, I'm trying to remember what some of the other problems were. I feel like the...
You never modify Ruby itself. You had to restart the whole package.
Yeah, that was the thing. Like it was really sticky, right? If you wanted to reload a Ruby manifest, you had to restart the whole Puppet master process, and that was it was really hard to get around. We would have had to build a third code loading system, I think, to get around that. I think, and when we were investigating it, what we ultimately found, I don't know if you've been to the I don't think that's happened yet. Henrik's talk about the future of the language. When we were doing user testing, what we often found was that people really wanted to do loops and iteration and collection over a structured data. And that was kind of the only thing they really needed the Ruby DSL for. Like there were some really edge cases where nothing but pure Ruby would do. But for like 95% of what people wanted, 95% of the reasons people wanted the Ruby DSL to work correctly was because they wanted to iterate over a data structure and generate resources from it in a predictable and like very terse way. And so we've been working on just adding that to the Puppet language instead. As for the general question of whether making a DSL kind of dooms you to this kind of stuff, I don't know if I have the answer to that. I think languages are tricky things and they'll always have growing pains, but I think the having a DSL that expresses your native objects in a much more terse and much more friendly way than trying to stuff it into a different language often pays off in ways that are hard to measure. I hope that helps a little. What's good at debugging Puppet code?
Besides like watching the master debug mode.
I was using Puppet Apply for all of this. And I was using a lot of, it was very primitive debugging because I am a very primitive debugger. My engineering chops are not up to speed at the moment. And so it's the equivalent of adding a whole bunch of breakpoints, adding a whole bunch of print statements, and just kind of letting it run there.
Hunter's written a fire model. Okay. You can actually stop the whole interpreter and just go grab all.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's cool.
Puppet dash try.
Nice. You were going to ask something?
Mostly about, so what the created from was biggest was you can use variables as a variable has a key value and a hash get interpolated.
Oh.
I was just curious if you think that was, or this is a hard question that can do.
So that sounds to me like something that the future parser will probably take care of because the expression-based grammar is a lot more flexible. Right now, hashes are weird objects in Puppet. I'm trying to remember how it works. Like they're technically expressions rather than data. And that just results in all kinds of weird edge cases. Yeah, I feel like someone told me that there was a similar issue that was going to go away in the future parser.
Yeah, mark it as a feature request.
Yeah. So it's, having watched Henrik attack one of those issues before in the future parser, I will say that it's probably easy to fix in the future parser and probably devilishly tough to fix in the current parser.
Oh, yeah.
Don't go there.
Yeah. No, yeah, keep the noise on about that. It'll probably get fixed. Hey.
There was some puzzle a while ago that factor 2 actually go away from the stringing to an actual
Real data types and structured data. Yeah, we really want to do that, and the plan is a little fuzzy to me at the moment. The problem with structured facts is that it has this kind of like knock-on effect throughout the entire ecosystem. So anything that has been configured to store facts is going to start getting some unexpected stuff. Anything that's been configured to read facts from the cache on disk is going to get some weird stuff. Anything that reads facts from a fact store like PuppetDB is going to start getting weird stuff. We were experimenting with ideas of having kind of dual format facts where they could have a structured format and then a stringified format. And depending on what interface you were using, you would get different ones. So for example, within the Puppet DSL, you would have a top-level variable called facts that would be a hash. That would be a big old data structure containing all of the facts with their actual data types, including structured facts like arrays and hashes. I don't currently know the status of that. I know it's on the roadmap. I would have to check.
Building a little bit on that, like, I mean, in factor itself, factor just returns whatever it like the factor returns. So in factor itself, structured facts work already, even in factor 1. In Puppet 3.3, there's an option to say string by facts false, which will instead, if factor return a hash or something, the facts terminus in Puppet itself will turn into string, not false. So in Puppet 3.3, there's an option to terminate stringification on. So then you will actually get a structured fact into Puppet. When that tries to store it in PuppetDB, things will probably break if you use that option. But if you're not using, if you're only using factor and Puppet, you can turn stringification.
That still leaves them all as top scope variables, though, whatever their value is, right?
But
That still leaves them as top scope variable. It doesn't do the facts hash. Yeah. Right.
You'll have to fix the assertive rule to be
with that option, this version will actually be.
Oh yeah, actually, and that's something that I've run into before, is that the string to bool function will actually barf if you feed it a real bool. So the pattern that I started using, yeah, exactly. So the pattern I started using is if I have a variable coming in like from a class parameter where I don't know whether it's going to be a string bool or a real bool, is I will say string to bool, parentheses, quote, the variable name. So I'll turn whatever it is into a string and then turn it back into a bool. And that works, that's super reliable.
Wow.
So glad you're so happy about the solution.
Well, I am, because I solved, I mean, like, okay, it was a real problem.
Isn't there an any to bool?
Sorry?
Isn't there an any to bool?
Yeah.
Is there an any bool?
Yeah, it's part of Puppy.
It's part of Puppy?
Yeah.
Oh.
PPI.
Oh, okay.
All right, cool.
Not standard lab though.
Yeah, it's not in standard lib yet. Anything else?
Any idea what's getting ripped out of all the WAT things in the feature parser and 4.0 eventually?
What's going away in the future parser and Puppet 4? I don't know yet. I would like to see a lot of that funny stuff go away. The part of why they are starting to talk about a spec now is that imposing a spec on the Puppet language as it stands in practice would be really, really tough. But since we're going to be making sort of a clean break at a major version boundary when we throw over to the future parser anyway, we could say the future parser is something that works with an actual spec, right? We can kind of start from the ground up. Not from the ground up, but in a sort of do a much more controlled evolution of the language from that point on. And since I believe the future parser is going to stay disableable in Puppet 4, even though we're going to turn it to default, that'll give everyone a little while to get their stuff in order and figure out how to live with the new world. Yeah, yeah.
So I got started with Puppet reading Learning Puppet guide in the docs. That was really great, and now I apparently am going to have to try to teach some Windows admins how to use Puppet. Is there any plans for documentation like that?
Kind of a getting started with Puppet on Windows. We would like to. Yeah, there's always more work than the documentation team can do. I would be excited about doing that. I don't know if we're going to get time to do it soon, but I do know that expanding further into Windows is pretty strategically important to us. So, yeah. Let's just say that I would really like to. And if you can tell me more about what kind of requirements you're running into as you're trying to teach these Windows people Puppet, that might be helpful. Whether you think like something basically the same as learning Puppet with just more Windows examples would help, or, was that me? Or whether you think a more serious overhaul is needed. That's something where I haven't had to try to teach a bunch of Windows people how to use Puppet before, so I could really use some input on that. All right, wonderful.
Puppet on Windows seems to shift. Like, I go look at it, and it's like next week or 2 weeks later, I go look at it again, and it's like completely different.
How do you mean completely different?
Just like just the not the use of Puppet, but everything that they use, all the reasons for others to use stuff with Puppet. Like, all right, we found out this thing, so we wrote this completely different tool set.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the things like the scheduled task instead of cron and stuff like that, it does make it a little bit hard. As far as I can tell, it's kind of unavoidable. Yeah. Spencer.
So I actually have the exact same questions that Nick does for you. My name is Spencer. I'm writing the second edition of ProPuppet. And we're trying to put a Windows section into that. Right now I've got screen capture, I install it, let's set a scheduled task and add a user and stuff. I would like to have that dialogue with you, and anyone else who has ideas on Windows or other support for that. But please find me.
Yeah, this is starting to sound like maybe we should do a kind of scope work session later on. Yeah, cool. Looks like we've got 6 minutes left, so let's go ahead and wrap it up, I think. Thanks for coming out to my talk. I really appreciate it. It was really great to be able to share all the weird stuff I found with you. And there's a repo on GitHub that has all of my test manifests in it. It's called Evil Made Manifest. And yeah, I accept only the worst pull requests. So yeah, thanks for coming down.